Good evening, you. You've hauled yourself through another day. Plans, noise, and that one stubborn worry you keep turning over like a pebble. Tonight, you get to set it down. You arrive to a shore where the air tastes like salt, where a lagoon breathes slow as sleep, and where the tide slides in and out with calm certainty. Keep listening, and you probably won't survive this in the dramatic way your anxious brain prefers because it's going to fall asleep on the job. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and let me know how your day has really been. Your worries, your exhaustion, or even a tiny joy that made you smile. I'm here to truly listen and offer the most sincere, heartfelt advice I can. Now, turn off the lights. Take a deep, slow breath, let your tiredness melt away, and gently close your eyes. Let's drift together into tonight's dreamlike lands. And tomorrow morning, if you still remember, send me a message and tell me what you dreamed. Your breath lengthens, and the shoreline sharpens into a different rhythm. You stand on a Lapita Shore, an island edge where sea and land share space politely. Under your feet, the sand is cool where the tide has just withdrawn, warmer where it still remembers the sun. Farther out, a reef line breaks the open ocean into a hush, turning larger swells into small, tidy ripples that stitch silver lines across the lagoon. You walk along the high tide mark, where shells collect like spilled beads and driftwood lies bleached smooth. Palms lean over the beach, fronds whispering as the breeze passes through. The air carries damp greenery, salt, and a faint thread of smoke that rises nearby and then drifts away as if it knows not to cling. Ahead, shelters sit low and practical, woven and lashed in ways that respect rain and heat. Mats hang to air out. Canoe hulls rest above the wet sand, propped carefully, their curves dark against the pale beach. Everything looks used, not displayed, built for hands that repeat the same motions until they become effortless. You are not greeted with ceremony. You are greeted with steady attention. People notice you and adjust around you. One person pauses from sorting something near the waterline and guides you with a palm-down sweep toward firmer sand so you don't sink. Another gesture indicates a place where the breeze is clean and the smoke will drift past you instead of into you. No words arrive. No interrogation. Welcome here is practical. You are shown where to step, where to sit, where not to disturb what is drying. As you settle, your eyes find the detail that makes the shore unmistakably Lapita. Clay vessels sit in neat rows on racks of flat slabs. Their surfaces are alive with pattern, crisp triangles, zigzags, nested bands, and tiny dented lines that catch the fading light and turn it into texture. The designs repeat with a steadiness that calms you without asking permission. You lean closer, careful with your feet, careful with your breath. The clay smells earthy and cool, like riverbank after rain, even though you are beside the sea. Some vessels look matte and fragile, still drying, their rims sharp enough to remind you that patience matters. Others are firmer, their shoulders decorated with stamped bands that wrap around the pot like a woven belt. The marks are not paint laid on later. They are pressed into the clay while it is still willing, before fire turns softness into strength. A small tool appears in someone's hand, bone or shell, its edge notched like a tiny comb. You don't take it. You simply watch it held steady for you to understand. In your mind, you feel the motion. Press, lift, shift, press again. Each bite leaves a chain of tiny dents, dent after dent, until a line becomes a border, and a border becomes a signature. Behind you, the lagoon changes its breathing. A thin sheet of water creeps farther up the sand, testing how far it can go. Someone checks the canoes above the tide line, tugging a lash here, nudging a support there, as casually as you might straighten a blanket before bed. Another person tends a low fire, coaxing it into patient embers rather than loud flame. Smoke threads upward and drifts away, leaving warmth without demanding attention. You sit on a mat angled toward the breeze, and the ground accepts your weight as if it's been waiting. Your shoulders loosen, your jaw unclenches. Above, the sky darkens in soft layers. The first stars appear, faint at first, then more confident, pricking the dusk like careful punctuation. The reef continues its steady labor, turning waves into whispers. The village continues, too. Hands rinsing in lagoon water, hands returning to clay, hands setting things down where they belong. You look from the stamped pottery to the lagoon's smooth surface and back again, and you begin to feel the rhythm underneath everything. Tide, breath, repetition, rest. Welcome does not arrive as a speech. It arrives as space made for you inside the evening's calm, and you let yourself be folded into it. One more quiet figure on the shore, listening to lagoon tides and watching patterns settle into your eyes until they start to feel like they have always been there. You keep sitting for a while, letting the lagoon's slow inhale and exhale iron your thoughts flat. The stamped pots remain in your peripheral vision like a quiet promise, and eventually your body does what bodies do when they feel safe. It leans toward curiosity. You rise without hurry and follow the soft choreography of the shore, stepping where the sand is firm and the shells won't bite. A small workspace opens up near the edge of the village, close enough to the water to borrow its damp air, far enough from the tide to stay dry. It isn't a workshop in the modern, dramatic sense, no grand doorway, no sign, no spotlight. It's simply a patch of ground that has learned what happens there, and it holds that knowledge in the smoothness of its wear. On woven mats, clay rests under damp leaves and cloth, protected from sun and sudden drying. Nearby, a shallow bowl of water catches light like a quiet mirror. Tools lie in a line, short pieces of shell shaped into comb-like edges, bits of bone smoothed down until they fit a hand, small wooden paddles darkened by use. Some stamps look almost delicate, tiny squares and triangles carved into their tips. Yet you can tell they're sturdy where it counts, built to press again and again without losing their bite. You squat at a respectful distance, because you understand the unspoken rule of places where people make things. Your awe is welcome, your clumsiness is not. Still, the makers accommodate you in the way this shore accommodates everything, through practical kindness. A mat is nudged into a better position so you can see. A vessel is rotated slightly so the pattern catches the fading light. Your presence is folded into the scene, not staged as the main event. Hands begin with the clay itself. It's been kneaded and worked until it becomes obedient. Still living, still soft, but no longer sticky with chaos. You watch fingers press and turn the mass, smoothing cracks before they exist, pinching edges into evenness. The clay holds fingerprints and then lets them go as it is polished, like your mind letting go of today's sharpest thoughts once it realizes it doesn't have to keep them. Then the stamping begins, and this is where the world turns into geometry. A small tool is lifted, shell or bone, and the edge reveals its secret. A row of fine teeth, as neat as a comb, but sharper in purpose. The tool meets the clay with gentle certainty. Press, lift, slide, press again. Each contact leaves a crisp sequence of dents, like tiny footprints marching in a straight line. You can almost hear the sound, even without it being offered to you. A soft, satisfying tap against damp earth. The pattern grows the way tides grow, increment by increment, never rushed, never forced. Borders appear first, framing the space like shoreline frames water. Then bands fill in, creating rhythm. Triangles nested inside triangles, zigzags that mimic wave edges, lines that step forward like a careful dance. The motifs repeat, but they don't feel repetitive. They feel steady, like a heartbeat. There is an artistry here that doesn't need to announce itself because it's already in control. You notice how the makers use the sand itself as part of the process. A pot is set down on a bed of fine grains so it won't sag or stick. A little sand dusts fingertips to reduce tackiness. The beach isn't just scenery. It's a tool chest spread out under the sky. Even the breeze participates, cooling the clay's surface, drying it slowly enough to keep it from cracking. Everything collaborates, quietly. Some stamps are simple teeth, leaving clean lines. Others are more complex, carved shapes that produce tiny triangles or dotted grids. A piece of shell with a triangular notch can create a repeating mountain range around the pot's shoulder. A stamp with a crosshatch tip leaves a texture like woven fiber. When several tools are used together, the surface becomes layered with meaning. Lines, bands, and filled panels that wrap around the vessel as if the pot is wearing a patterned garment. You begin to understand the deeper point, the one that doesn't need a lecture. These designs are not random decoration. They are a way of holding memory steady in a world where water and wind constantly rearrange the coastline. The lagoon erases footprints within minutes. These stamps resist that erasing. They turn soft clay into a record of hands and habits, of families and communities, of places known well enough to be mapped by touch. Your eyes keep chasing one particular band. A dentate strip, little tooth marks marching in rows, that seems to pulse when the light hits it. You realize how physically intelligent the technique is. A stamp is easier than drawing a perfect line freehand. Yes, but it's also more consistent, more shareable. The tool carries the pattern so the hand can focus on pressure and placement. It is craftsmanship designed for continuity, for making sure the design survives tired days and uneven moods. A fresh pot sits nearby, half-finished, its clay still glossy with moisture. You watch as the maker adjusts the angle of the stamp, turning it just slightly so the next press meets the previous one without a gap. The smallest misalignment would cause a hiccup in the rhythm. But the hands correct before an error becomes visible, the way you sometimes catch a spiraling thought before it becomes a sleepless night. The pattern remains smooth, seamless, almost hypnotic. As dusk deepens, The stamped pots seem to glow softly, their textures turning the last light into something you can almost hold. You feel the odd comfort of precision. Not rigid, not cold, just dependable. The shore teaches you that beauty can be built from tiny repeated choices, made calmly, made well, made again. And you stay there a little longer than you intend, watching the shell-toothed stamps press their quiet signatures into the clay, while your own mind, under the same gentle pressure, begins to take on a calmer pattern too. You leave the stamping space as if you're stepping out of a spell, because in a way you are. The patterns stay behind your eyes, dent after dent, triangle after triangle, still marching in neat little rows. Your body carries that steadiness as you walk back toward the waterline, where the lagoon lies smooth and darkening, like glass that has learned how to breathe. The canoes wait above the tide mark, their hulls pulled up where the sand is firm. In the dimming light, they look like sleeping animals, long-backed, patient, ready to wake the moment hands return to them. You approach with the same careful respect you gave the clay. Here, too, everything is made for repetition, built to survive salt, sun, and the occasional human moment of overconfidence. You notice the lashings first. Fibers wrap and cross and tighten in patterns that echo the pottery stamps, though they're made of cord, not clay. The joinery doesn't rely on metal. It relies on tension and knowledge, the kind that lives in the fingertips. A side float, an outrigger, rests parallel to the main hull, kept at a measured distance by crossbeams. It's elegant, really. A simple design that turns narrowness into stability, speed into safety. It's as if the canoe has two minds, one that wants to cut through water, and another that insists you won't roll your foolish self into the lagoon. Hands return, and with them the canoe becomes active. It is nudged, lifted, eased forward in small coordinated movements. You don't hear commands, you see alignment. Someone checks the lashings by pressing and listening with their palms. Someone else runs fingertips along the hull's edge, feeling for roughness or a new crack. The canoe receives this attention like a trusted tool, like a companion that deserves respect because it has carried people through days when the sea was kind and days when the sea was not. You step in carefully, placing weight low and centered, because the lagoon has no interest in your pride. The canoe rocks, but only slightly, as if it's testing you. When you remain calm, it settles. And then you're off, pushed from sand into water, the hull slipping forward with that quiet, satisfying glide that makes you wonder why you ever accepted the concept of traffic. The lagoon holds you. Water slides along the canoe's sides with a soft hiss. Beneath the surface, pale sand gives way to darker patches. Seagrass beds, coral heads, scattered stones. Small fish flicker like quick thoughts you don't need to chase. The reef line sits farther out as a low, pale seam where waves break and reform, endlessly practicing being gentle. You watch the paddling. Not frantic, not theatrical, just steady. The blade enters the water cleanly, pulls, exits, pauses. The canoe responds with obedient forward motion. There's a lesson here that your nervous system pretends not to know until it's forced to remember. Consistency beats intensity. A little effort, repeated calmly, moves you farther than a dramatic burst followed by collapse. Your muscles loosen as you allow yourself to be carried by someone else's practiced rhythm. As you drift across the lagoon, navigation reveals itself, not as a single aha trick, but as layered attention. The shoreline becomes a map made of silhouettes. A leaning palm here, a darker cluster of trees there, a pale strip of beach that catches the last of the sun. The makers of canoes and pots are also makers of routes, and they read the land the way you might read a familiar room in the dark, by shape, by placement, by what belongs where. You notice the swells, too, even inside the reef's protection. They arrive as gentle lifts under the hull, subtle enough that you could miss them if you were busy performing your own panic. But the canoe responds, rising and settling in long, slow pulses. Out beyond the reef, the ocean sends its larger breathing in. The reef softens it, but it cannot erase it completely. Those pulses become information. They tell you where the ocean's energy is slipping through openings in the reef, where deeper water channels run, where the lagoon floor changes. Above, the sky deepens. The first stars are no longer shy. They appear more clearly now, and the dome of darkness begins to feel structured. Points and lines, familiar groupings, steady positions. You sense how a person can hold directions in the mind without needing a compass in the hand. A star's rise, a star's angle, the way the night sky rotates slowly as if turning you in a cradle. Navigation is patience with the universe's slow movements. Clouds, too, become part of the language. A faint glow on the horizon can suggest a distant island catching remaining light, even when the land itself is too low to see. A certain kind of cloud formation can hint at a reef line or a shore, because air behaves differently above land than above open water. You aren't taught this in words. You simply witness how eyes linger on specific details, how attention is distributed like weight in the canoe, balanced, purposeful, not wasted. Sea life participates in the map. Birds arc toward certain places and not others. A cluster of seabirds hovering and dipping can signal fish below, which can also mean a change in water depth, which can also mean a channel nearby. Everything is connected, not in a mystical way that tries to sell you incense, but in the practical way that keeps people alive and fed. The canoe glides past a shallower area where the lagoon turns lighter, almost milky in the dim light. Someone shifts the paddle angle slightly, and the canoe adjusts course as if it's following a line only they can see. You understand that navigation here isn't a dramatic finding yourself. It's 1,000 small corrections made early, before a small drift becomes a big problem. It's the same principle as stamping a perfect border. Align each press, and the whole band stays clean. You drift long enough that the shoreline behind you feels less like a boundary and more like a memory. The village lights are low, firelight mostly, warm points that don't compete with the stars. The lagoon's surface reflects the sky in broken pieces, as if it's trying to keep the night for itself. You feel the air cool on your skin. You feel your thoughts cool too. When the canoe finally turns back toward shore, you realize you've been resting the whole time, even while moving. You've been guided by an intelligence that doesn't hurry, by a rhythm that doesn't shout. And as you approach the sand again, the canoe's glide slows, gentle as a hand easing you back into bed. You carry the calm certainty that routes exist, even in darkness. if you keep your attention soft and steady. The canoe's nose slips into the shallows, and you step out with the careful dignity of someone pretending they meant to move that slowly all along. Wet sand cools your feet, and behind you the lagoon releases the hull with a soft, reluctant sigh, as if it would happily keep you floating there until morning. But the shore draws you back, toward warm light, toward the quiet work that holds this place together. Smoke threads the air in narrow ribbons, rising from a low fire near the village edge. It behaves with manners, drifting away instead of clinging to your face. You follow it, and the pottery returns to your attention like a remembered name. Drying racks sit under partial shelter, lifted from the ground so air can circulate. Rows of vessels rest there, each one stamped with crisp bands, triangles, zigzags, dented lines that catch the last light and turn it into texture. Since you last looked, the clay has changed. It is less glossy now, more settled, as if it has tightened around the pattern and decided to keep it. You feel the logic without needing it explained. Clay is loyal to moisture. Take that moisture away too quickly and the clay complains. First with tiny fissures, then with full, unforgiving cracks that slice right through your beautiful border like a rude interruption. So the pots are shaded, spaced, turned. Hands hover near them, checking surfaces the way you check your own face in a mirror after a hard day. Quietly, looking for stress before it becomes damage. One vessel is lifted and held at the fire's edge, not to bake it, just to warm it. It is rotated slowly so heat moves through evenly, then set down again. Another receives the same treatment. You notice how much restraint it takes to work like this. Slow enough to protect the clay, confident enough not to rush. It's the kind of patience your nervous system keeps hearing about but rarely practices. Beyond the racks, the firing area waits. A shallow pit lined with stones, blackened by previous burns. Nearby, fuel is stacked in neat, sensible piles. Dry wood, coconut husk, bits of bark, each type ready to burn with its own tempo. A few pots sit close to the pit in that in-between zone where warmth lives without punishment, preheating gently like hands warming before a task. When the pieces are ready, they are arranged with care. Not tossed, not crowded. Upright or slightly angled, supported by stones or shards so they won't slump as heat rises. Space is left between them so flame and hot air can move around every curve. Even now, the stamped bands matter. Nothing should scrape those dents or blur their edges. The patterns aren't paint you can redo later. They're pressed in memory, and memory deserves protection. A small flame appears, coaxed into existence rather than announced. Dry material catches first, then denser wood is added a little at a time. The fire grows disciplined, guided instead of unleashed. You can almost feel the makers listening to it, watching the color, the way it leans when the breeze nudges, the way it prefers one side of the pit if the wind insists. Adjustments happen through small movements. A shift of fuel, a piece placed to shield a gust, a pause to let heat spread before asking for more. As warmth increases, the pottery begins its quiet transformation. Moisture hidden inside the clay starts to move, searching for a way out. This is the dangerous part, the part where impatience turns water into steam too fast and steam expands with brutal honesty. so the heat climbs slowly. Smoke thins. Embers multiply. The air carries that unmistakable scent of earth-changing state. Warm clay and resinous wood. Salt air pulled through heat and then softened again by night. Time stretches in a way that feels oddly kind. The stars sharpen overhead, and firelight paints moving shadows across the shelter poles. The stamped dents blink in and out as the flames shift, like patterns breathing. Some surfaces darken with soot for a while, then lighten where heat burns cleaner. The pots look both fragile and inevitable, as if they are choosing hardness 1 minute at a time. Eventually the fire is allowed to step back. Flames retreat into embers. Heat remains, steady and deep. A thin layer of ash and warm sand is eased over parts of the bed, not to smother the work, but to slow its cooling and protect it from sudden night wind. You watch the embers pulse softly, and you notice your own breathing match them. Slow in, slow out, because your body is apparently willing to learn from anything, as long as it's warm and quiet. Cooling becomes the final test, because pottery doesn't forgive sudden change. Too much wind, too quick a drop in temperature, and all that careful work can split in silence. So the pieces rest where the warmth holds them, sheltered, unhurried, releasing heat slowly into the dark. You sit nearby and realize you are doing the same. Your day's intensity drains out of you the way heat drains from the clay. Gradually, safely, without a crack. When a vessel is finally lifted, it looks familiar but newly certain. Hard now, sound when touched, its stamped band locked into permanence. It is the lagoon's calm made solid. And as it's placed gently back on the rack to finish resting in the air, you feel your own edges settle too. Steady enough to hold tomorrow without breaking. The fire fades into a low, steady glow behind you, and the night air cools your skin in slow increments, like someone turning down a lamp one careful notch at a time. The pottery rests on its racks, still warm at the core, still holding the stamped patterns as if those tiny dents have always belonged to the clay. You carry that same sense of gradual change as you move back toward the waterline, because the lagoon is shifting again. The tide has begun to retreat, drawing itself away from the beach with patient discipline. The lagoon's surface lowers almost imperceptibly, revealing more sand, more shallow pools, more dark ribbons of seagrass. It is not a dramatic exit, no sudden rush, just the ocean quietly reclaiming its distance, leaving behind a temporary map of places that are usually hidden. People gather along the edge of the reef flat with the kind of readiness that looks effortless only because it has been practiced for generations. Woven baskets appear. Simple tools come along. Sticks for prying, shells for scooping, hands for everything else. You follow, careful with your steps, because coral and confidence have a long history of disagreeing. The reef at low tide is a different world. It becomes a mosaic of shallow pools that mirror the stars, broken by coral heads that rise like small cities. Water traps itself in pockets. Clear, knee-deep here, ankle-deep there, each pocket holding its own tiny inhabitants. The air smells sharper out here, mineral and salt and seaweed, and the breeze feels cleaner, less smoky, as if it has been rinsed. You wade slowly, letting your feet find stable ground. Sand gives way to rough coral plates, then back to sand again. You learn quickly that the reef is not one surface. It is many surfaces layered together, and each demands a different kind of attention. Your body adjusts, knees slightly bent, weight kept low, steps placed with care. It is the same principle as stepping into the canoe. Don't rush, don't wobble, don't challenge the sea to teach you a lesson. Hands gesture to you, an open palm indicating where to walk, a subtle tilt of fingers warning you away from a sharp patch. You watch how they move across the reef as if they can read it by feel alone. Their pace is steady, unforced. They aren't hunting the reef like a conquering hero. They're visiting it like a respected relative. In one shallow pool, you see shells clustered along a rock edge. Someone reaches in and lifts one carefully, checking it, then either keeps it or sets it back with a gentleness that makes your modern brain briefly malfunction. You're used to find thing, take thing, and here you witness find thing, consider thing, which is a genuinely radical concept in a world that buys stuff for stress relief. The rule of gentle harvest reveals itself through action rather than instruction. Smaller shells are left. A few are returned after inspection, placed back in the water like they're being tucked in. Seaweed is gathered in modest handfuls, not ripped away in greedy sheets. A rock is turned, something is taken, then the rock is placed back in its original position with care, as if the reef's furniture must be returned to the way it likes it. The reef is treated like a living pantry, one you don't smash just because you're hungry. You watch someone pry a shell free with a tool that looks simple but behaves like precision. The motion is controlled. Leverage, gentle pressure, release. No sudden yanks. No cracking. The shell comes away cleanly, and the pool remains calm, as if it didn't even notice the transaction. The basket receives the find, and you notice how little goes in compared to how much could be taken. The restraint is not scarcity. It's policy. It's care masquerading as ordinary behavior. As you move farther across the reef flat, fish flicker through deeper channels like quicksilver thoughts. Some dart into coral gaps, disappearing into shadow. You see small traps or barriers set in places where water funnels as the tide retreats. Locations chosen because the reef itself guides the flow. The ingenuity is quiet, using the lagoon's own habits to help feed the community without chasing fish until everyone is exhausted and the reef is annoyed. You kneel beside a pool that reflects starlight so clearly it feels like a second sky. Tiny creatures cling to the rock, small, armored, perfectly adapted to this in-between zone that is wet and then dry and then wet again. You feel a surge of wanting to touch everything, the way you want to scroll everything, the way you want to know everything, and you also feel the immediate counterweight of this place's calm boundaries. Touching is not the same as respecting. Taking is not the same as earning. You reach out to steady yourself and your fingertips brush coral. It is rough, surprisingly sharp, and you pull back fast enough to avoid anything dramatic, but slow enough to feel your heart do a small, offended hop. Of course, the reef is not soft. Of course, it doesn't care about your delicate expectations. The ocean is generous, but it is not a spa. You shake your hand once, more out of pride than pain, and remind yourself that this is why you were guided to step carefully in the first place. A hand gestures you toward a safer path, sandier, smoother, less likely to punish you for being a human with two left feet. You follow, and the embarrassment dissolves quickly, because nobody here performs concern as a spectacle. They simply prevent problems before they grow. As baskets gradually fill, you notice the balance. A little from here, a little from there. The reef is not stripped. It is sampled. The choices seem guided by knowledge of seasons and sizes, by an understanding of what needs to remain so that the reef remains itself. The lagoon is not just water. It is a relationship. If you take too much, it closes its hands. If you take with care, it keeps offering. By the time you turn back toward shore, the tide has withdrawn farther, exposing broader sandbars that gleam faintly under the stars. The village lights ahead are warm, low, steady. The baskets you carry or help carry feel satisfyingly light for the value they hold, because value here is measured not only in what you bring back, but in what you intentionally leave behind. You walk home across the wet sand with salt on your skin and the reef's quiet rules settling into your thoughts. You understand in your bones that gentle harvesting is not weakness. It is long-term intelligence. It is the same patient discipline you saw at the kiln, the same careful alignment you saw in the stamping. Small actions repeated with respect, creating a future that doesn't crack when the temperature changes. The baskets come back with you, swinging lightly as reef water drains away and salt dries on your skin. The sand turns firm underfoot, and the village's firelight warms the night in low, steady pools. Nothing is dumped in a proud heap. The harvest is sorted with the same calm precision you saw in the stamping. Small decisions made early, before disorder turns into waste. Shells are rinsed and set to drain. Seaweed is shaken free of sand and spread thin so air can pass. What will spoil first is handled first, because the shore respects time the way it respects tide. You follow the flow inland toward the garden edges where the ground rises slightly and the air feels less wet. Here, Lapita life shows its quieter genius. Food not as a single dramatic meal, but as a system grown, gathered, stored, protected, rotated. Garden plots sit in clearings where soil is darker. Broad leaves hold beads of moisture. Vines trail along mounded earth. Narrow paths thread between them so feet do not crush what takes months to grow. At the garden's edge, storage structures wait like silent guardians. Low shelters stand under palm thatch. Raised platforms balance on posts. Hanging racks sway gently. Moisture creeps up from soil and drifts in from air, persistent as a worry that returns at bedtime. So the village refuses contact with damp ground. Platforms lift food into moving air. Floors are slatted so breath and breeze can pass. Smoke from nearby cooking fires drifts through, discouraging insects without needing constant attention. Large ceramic jars sit beneath eaves where rain cannot reach them. Their rounded shoulders catch the glow, and some wear stamped bands, dentate lines and nested triangles, circling the clay like calm signatures. A lid of woven fiber or fitted clay rests on top, weighted with a small stone. When you lean close, you catch a faint scent of smoke and dried food, not the sour bite of mold. The jar is a promise. Not only that food exists now, but that it will still exist later. Baskets do the rest of the work. Some are tight enough to keep out fine sand and small insects. Others are looser so roots can breathe. Flat trays turn the night breeze into a tool, encouraging drying instead of rot. Many are hung from rafters by cords, swaying just out of reach of hungry rats. You can't help an amused thought. Survival here is often a polite refusal to share. Near one shelter, a rack holds strips of fish laid out with space between each piece. They are not piled where moisture can linger. They are arranged like pots in the kiln bed, each given room to become what it needs to become. Beneath the rack, a low smoldering fire produces more smoke than flame. The smoke rises, wraps the food in a slow haze, and then escapes into the night. It is patience made practical, buying days and weeks from something that would otherwise spoil overnight. Roots and tubers are treated with the same steady logic. Some rest in baskets lined with leaves. Others are kept cool under cover, separated so one soft spot cannot spoil a whole stash. Nothing is stored and forgotten. It is checked. It is rotated. The first hint of trouble is handled early, quietly. You watch someone lift a basket and inspect the contents with calm focus. One piece is removed, slightly bruised, and set aside for immediate use. Everything else is returned to safety. The gesture is small, but it holds a philosophy. Do not wait for problems to become disasters. Your eyes return to the stamped jars, and the patterns feel different now. Earlier you saw beauty and identity, memory pressed into clay. Now you also see function. Texture makes a jar easier to grip with wet hands, safer to carry when tired, less likely to slip when everything smells of fish and smoke and salt. Here, art is braided into use. Decoration is part of the tool, not a separate indulgence. A small test arrives in the firelight. A thin trail of ants exploring the leg of a platform, drawn by scent. The response is immediate but gentle. A tray is shifted higher. A ring of ash is dusted at the base of the post. The smoldering fire is angled so its drift brushes the underside of the rack. The ants hesitate, redirect, and disappear into the dark. The crisis ends before it becomes a story. Standing at the garden edge, you realize the gardens and the storage shelters are one loop. Food moves from soil to basket to jar to fire to body, then back to soil again. Pottery holds what the reef offers when the tide allows. Baskets hold what the garden gives when the season is kind. Smoke, shade, height, and airflow cooperate to buy time. Time to rest, time to wait out rough weather, time to feed everyone without panic. The village's calm is not an accident. It is built through hundreds of small choices. Lids placed, baskets hung, racks spaced, jars sheltered. Made with the same steady hands that stamp patterns into clay and steer canoes across dark water. And you, softened by salt and night air, feel that steadiness seep into you as well, as if some part of you is learning how to store peace. Protected from damp, lifted above pests, and kept where it can breathe. You drift away from the storage shelters with the sense that everything here has its place. Jars under eaves, baskets in the breeze, smoke where insects would otherwise get ideas. The night deepens, and the village settles into a softer tempo. Firelight stays low, as if it understands that shouting is a daytime habit and this shore prefers to whisper. Near the edge of the communal space, you notice a different kind of preparation. Not food, not clay, not canoe lashings. Something more intimate, more about the body as a living surface. A bowl sits on a mat, holding paste the color of wet earth. Another container holds a darker mixture, almost black, glossy in the glow. Beside them lie simple tools: a pointed thorn, a thin bone needle, a shell shard smoothed on one side. Humble tools for work that matters. You sit where the breeze can cool you and watch hands work with the same patient control you saw at the kiln. The paste is stirred slowly, thickened with ash, softened with water, adjusted until it holds together without dripping. A pinch of salt disappears into it, not as seasoning, but as a practical helper, changing texture, helping it cling, keeping damp air from turning everything sour. Mud and salt. The shore's basics, turned into a quiet kind of language that can travel with a person wherever the tide carries them. A person offers their forearm, turning it so firelight can see what it needs to see. Skin is wiped clean, dried with a palm, then marked in thin strokes. Some designs are temporary. Mud patterns meant to fade with washing and tide spray. They curve around wrists and elbows, following movement rather than fighting it. Lines become borders. Dots become clusters. A small spiral appears near a shoulder, modest but unmistakable. You recognize the same logic as the pottery stamps. Repetition, framing, rhythm. The body becomes a vessel, and the mud becomes its stamped border. Other markings are meant to stay. The bone needle is cleaned, then held above skin as if even the air must be respected before anything touches flesh. There is no rush, no theatrical pause. The work begins with small taps, steady as a heartbeat. The needle pricks. The dark mixture follows. The skin accepts it in tiny increments. Pain may exist, but it is not given the spotlight. What matters is steadiness, pressure, spacing, patience. The same discipline that keeps a pot from cracking when the fire climbs. You notice the breathing of the person receiving the marks. Slow in, slow out. It matches the lagoon's pulse and the ember's glow, and you realize the body is being treated like clay, warmed into readiness, worked with care, allowed to settle. Too fast and you tear. Too careless and the mark blurs. Here, deliberateness feels like kindness. The designs stay modest in scale, but rich in intention. A band of dented dots wraps an upper arm, echoing the tooth marks of a shell stamp. Tiny triangles nest along a collarbone like a necklace you can't drop in the sand. Fine lines step down an ankle, visible only when someone is close enough to belong. You sense these patterns do more than decorate. They signal connection. Family lines, shared voyages, skills, obligations, and the quiet truth of who shows up when weather shifts. They also teach restraint because the meaning sits in precision, not in size. Jewelry joins in with the same honesty. Shell beads, smoothed by sand and time, are strung in short loops and tied with fiber. A carved pendant hangs at the chest, light enough to move with breathing. A polished bone piece rests at the throat, not as threat, but as reminder that sea and land share you. The beads are irregular on purpose. Each one records a small decision, each one proof that beauty can be functional and personal at once. A subtle gesture draws your attention to your own hands, then to the bowl of mud paste. You understand what is being offered without it being spoken. You extend your palm, Cool mud touches the outer edge of your hand, forming a thin border, then a small cluster of dots near your wrist. The mark feels cold for a moment, then comforting, like a cool cloth on a tired forehead. You hold your hand up and watch firelight catch the wet surface. For once, you do not need to explain yourself. You simply accept the gesture and let it be enough. You also notice scars, faint lines older than the last storm, older than your own arrival. Some come from work. Coral scratches, knife slips, heat kisses from the fire. Others are shaped with care, the kind that holds a story without announcing it. Your modern mind wants captions and tidy labels. This place offers texture instead, and somehow that feels more respectful. In the firelight, your mud border darkens as it dries, edges sharpening. The fresh tattooed points glisten briefly, then settle as if they've found their home. A warm palm presses gently over the finished area, not to hide it, but to help it rest. Watching this, you feel your own identity loosen, no longer a stack of tasks, more like a pattern you can build slowly, one calm decision at a time. The breeze slides over your skin, cool and clean, and your temporary border rests against your hand like a quiet reminder that you can be held without being owned. The mud on your hand finishes drying into a thin, cool crust, and you flex your fingers once, testing how the mark moves with you. It doesn't crack or smear. It simply stays, like a small promise that the night will hold together. You lower your hand, and the village's attention shifts, gently, practically, toward the next shared task, the one that always arrives when baskets have returned and jars are ready. Food becoming a feast. You follow warm scents and brighter ember light. Mats are laid out wider than before, their woven patterns catching the glow in quiet ripples. People move with purpose, but not with hurry. The kind of purpose that says, "We have done this before, we will do it again." There is no need to sprint toward something that will meet us anyway. Ingredients appear in stages, as if the shore itself is delivering them. Reef harvest is rinsed, shells tapped and checked, seaweed shaken clean. Tubers and greens come in from the garden edge in baskets that smell faintly of smoke and fiber. A stamped jar is set down with its lid lifted just enough to show dried stores inside. Proof that planning is not fear, it is respect for time. A cooking pit waits, shallow and wide. Stones ring it like a patient fence. Fuel is stacked nearby, dry wood and husk, chosen the way kiln fuel is chosen, for steady heat rather than drama. Fire is coaxed into life again, and soon the real goal arrives. Embers, glowing red and disciplined. You watch the division of labor and it feels like watching lagoon currents, different streams moving in the same direction. Hands peel and rinse roots, slicing away bruised spots with quick, economical motions. Hands crush and mash, turning firm tubers into soft, even portions. Hands fold broad leaves into parcels, tucking corners as neatly as stamped borders meet without gaps. Shellfish is threaded onto thin sticks. Greens are sorted by tenderness. Everything happens in quiet coordination, as if the village has one shared set of lungs. A leaf is laid flat, its veins a natural grid. Food is placed on it with care. A portion of root, a cluster of greens, a piece of fish, a pinch of salt that smells like the lagoon itself. The leaf folds over, fiber ties it closed. The parcel looks like a gift, which, in a way, it is: heat and nourishment wrapped in patience. Some parcels are nestled into warm ash, covered lightly so heat wraps them from every side. Others wait at the edge where warmth is gentle. You notice how the cooking mirrors the firing of pottery. Slow escalation, careful placement, protection from sudden change. If you rush clay, it cracks. If you rush food, it punishes you back. Nearby, shells simmer in a pot balanced over coals, liquid barely moving. The smell is clean and briny. A shell schemes the surface, removing foam before it turns the broth harsh. Greens are added late, when the heat has settled into steadiness. You're given small tasks that keep you useful without endangering anyone's dinner. You carry water, careful not to drag sand into it. You fan smoke away from a drying rack so it doesn't overwhelm the food. You hold a basket while cooked parcels are moved aside to rest. Tiny jobs, but your body loves them. They make you part of the pattern, and they keep your hands from reaching for tomorrow. Serving begins in the same calm order. Leaf platters are set out. Portions are placed evenly, not piled, not hoarded. Bowls travel hand to hand with unspoken timing, the way a canoe paddle trades sides to keep the course clean. Someone wipes a drip before it reaches the mat. Someone straightens a parcel so it doesn't spill. Small care, everywhere, like stitches that keep a garment from tearing. When a parcel is opened, steam releases with a soft sigh, carrying the scent of leaf and earth and salt. Roots have turned tender. Fish flakes under the gentlest pressure. Greens sit glossy and dark, still holding their shape. Broth reflects firelight like a shallow tide pool. You eat slowly because anything else would feel rude to the effort that brought this food here. From reef to basket, from garden to shelter, from jar to fire. Around you, people settle into the communal hush that follows shared work. Hands wipe clean, then rest. The surf beyond the reef keeps whispering, steady as breath. Your mud-marked hand rests on your knee, and you notice the border is still there, darkened now, as temporary and as real as calm. A small problem tries to arrive, because life insists on staying slightly inconvenient. A gust pushes smoke low across the mats, stinging eyes and turning the air sharp. Your modern reflex wants to complain loudly, as if volume can re-aim wind. But the answer is simple. Stones are shifted. A smoldering husk is moved. Mats slide a little into cleaner air. The smoke lifts again, and the feast continues as if the interruption was nothing more than the tide testing the shore. Under the stars, with stamped pottery cooling nearby and reef salt still clinging to your skin, your thoughts simplify. Eat, breathe, rest, belong. And if that feels dangerously close to peace, yes, this is where the village quietly gets you every time. The feast melts into a warm afterglow where your limbs feel heavier in the best way, as if your body has finally agreed to stop carrying the whole day on its shoulders. Firelight softens. Leaf platters are folded and stacked. Bowls are wiped clean and set aside. The village lets work dissolve into rest. Beyond the shelter edge, the lagoon lies dark and calm, a sheet of night with a faint shimmer where starlight lands and breaks apart. The reef whispers at the horizon, turning the ocean's insistence into something that sounds like patience. Then the air changes. not with drama. It shifts the way a room shifts when someone opens a door to cooler night air. The breeze that had been wandering in from the reef grows firmer and chooses a direction. Smoke, which had been rising politely, lowers and streams sideways in one clean ribbon. Your skin notices first. A prickle along your forearms, a tightening at the back of your neck. Your eyes lift before your mind can argue. Clouds that were soft and distant have stacked into darker layers, flattening the stars in that direction. Over the lagoon, the surface grows textured, tiny corrugations marching across it, like invisible fingers raking the water. No one panics. The village simply pivots the way a canoe pivots when a paddle changes angle. Mats slide farther under cover. Loose leaves are gathered before the wind can make a mess. Embers are nudged into tighter containment so they won't wander when the air gets bold. You follow because the shore has already taught you that small corrections early prevent large disasters later. The pottery is checked first. Newly fired vessels still hold warmth in their cores. Drying pieces still hold moisture in their walls. Wind can dry clay too fast and invite hairline cracks. Rain can soften a surface before it is ready, turning crisp stamped dents into blur. So racks are shifted deeper under shelter. Cloths and broad leaves are pulled down and angled like modest roofs. Delicate pieces are carried into the safest corner and set on firm supports, protected from splashes and sudden chills. Storage follows with the same quiet competence. Jar lids are weighted with stones. Hanging baskets are lifted higher so damp air cannot settle inside them. Anything that must stay dry is moved up and in. A smoldering husk is repositioned so its smoke discourages insects without choking the shelter. Nothing about it is glamorous, which is precisely why it works. Then attention turns to the canoes. The lagoon is sheltered by the reef, but wind can still turn protected water into choppy nuisance, and nuisance is the first step toward real trouble. Hulls are dragged farther up the beach to sand that stays firm. Lashings are checked and tightened. Outrigger floats are secured so they won't slam and strain if waves begin to slap. Loose gear is gathered, bailers, coils of cord, and paddles, because wind loves stealing small things when people are tired. Out over the lagoon, the texture intensifies. Dark water takes on a duller sheen as cloud cover thickens, and the wind draws longer lines across the surface. The reef still breaks the ocean's larger swell, but you can feel the ocean pushing harder, sending energy through channels and openings. The lagoon begins to pulse, lift, settle, lift, as if a deeper breath is gathering itself. The first drops arrive as scattered taps, spaced far apart, almost polite. They strike sand and vanish. They strike the lagoon and leave rings that expand and overlap. Then the drops become more frequent, the rings multiplying until the water looks stitched with ripples. The scent changes. Wet sand, damp leaf, smoke pressed down by moisture, and the air cools another notch. A frond slaps somewhere and then settles. Your chest tightens slightly, because storms wake the part of you that remembers you are not in charge. Your modern mind wants to label the feeling, bargain with it, schedule it for later. The storm does not accept meeting invitations. But the village does not feed your fear. Movements stay measured. People take positions where they can watch shelter edges. redirect runoff, and keep embers contained. The work looks almost ritual, though it's not about magic. It's about repetition, the same steady intelligence behind stamping a border so clean it never stutters, behind firing pottery slowly so steam doesn't tear it apart, behind taking only what the reef can spare. Rain thickens, steady enough now to soften outlines. The lagoon's edge creeps and retreats, wind pushing water up and then letting it slide back. The world becomes gradients. Black water, pale sand, dark cloud, warm ember, and your senses sharpen and simplify. You settle under shelter with everyone else, letting the storm gather itself out over the lagoon. You are not asked to be brave. You are simply invited to be present, to let the night do what it will while the village does what it knows. And as the wind continues to rise, you sense the coming problem will not be the storm itself. It will be something smaller that slips out of place. One lashing that loosens, one tool that rolls, one paddle that disappears into the dark, because trouble almost always begins quietly, right when everyone believes the important parts are already safe. You listen to rain on leaf roofs and feel sleep edging closer. The storm settles into its rhythm. Rain in steady sheets, wind in long, insistent pushes that make the palm fronds hiss and shiver. The shelter holds. The embers glow low and contained, refusing to be bullied into a blaze. You sit with your back supported, your hands warm near your own body, your mud border drying darker at the edges. Outside, the lagoon is a shifting field of ripples and black shine. This is the part where your modern brain usually tries to be heroic for no reason. It wants to pace. It wants to forecast. It wants to invent 1,000 outcomes and then pretend worrying counts as preparation. But the village has already done preparation. So you let yourself be guided by their calm, and you sink into watching rather than fighting. The problem arrives anyway, as promised, small, stupid, and perfectly timed. A gust comes harder than the others, and the rain slants sideways. Something clatters near the edge of the shelter. A light sound, not the heavy crash of pottery. Thank everything. You turn your head and see a shape skittering across wet sand. Long, narrow, familiar. A paddle. It must have been set down for a moment during the securing of canoes, or placed against a post when hands shifted to protect the racks. The wind doesn't care about your system, takes the paddle and gives it a new plan. The blade scrapes once, then the whole thing slides, pulled by the gust like a leaf with ambition. Before anyone can make the motion dramatic, the paddle reaches the slope of sand that leads to the water. Rain has slicked the surface. The paddle slips faster, and the next gust finishes the job, nudging it into the lagoon's edge. For a second, you feel the emotional spike, the sharp little jolt of, oh no, not the important tool that your brain loves because it's awake now. In a storm, a paddle is not a luxury. It is control. It is the ability to return, to steer, to avoid being pushed where you shouldn't go. One missing paddle is not an apocalypse, but it is a crack in readiness, and cracks matter when conditions are shifting. The response is immediate but not panicked. Two people move toward the beach edge with bodies kept low against the wind, scanning the sand where the paddle might catch. Another person shifts a torch or emberlight source under cover so the flame doesn't drown. Yet the glow reaches outward. Someone else checks the canoe lashings again, because losing a paddle suggests the wind has found weaknesses. You rise as well because you are here, you are able, and the lagoon is not going to retrieve anything for you out of kindness. You step to the shelter's edge and stare into the rain, eyes narrowed against spray. The paddle is visible only in flashes. Dark line, pale blade, bobbing near the shallows, drifting with the push and pull of water. The tide is in an awkward stage. Not fully low, not fully high, but moving with storm energy layered on top. The wind keeps shoving surface water shoreward, then letting it slip back, creating a messy, uncertain drift. Your first instinct is to run straight at it, because your body is excellent at offering solutions that feel brave and are statistically unhelpful. You check yourself. You remember the reef's lesson. Small corrections early. Steady steps. Do not challenge water for sport. You also remember that the village doesn't do hero theatrics. It does coordination. You watch the shoreline carefully. The paddle doesn't move randomly. It moves in pulses, pushed in, drawn out, like the lagoon is breathing through clenched teeth. You begin to time it. When a gust pushes water up, the paddle floats closer. When the wind eases, the paddle drifts away. The trick is not to chase it. The trick is to meet it where it will be. You move along the beach edge with small, sure steps, keeping your weight low so a gust won't steal your balance. Rain beads on your skin and runs down your arms. Your hand with the mud border feels slightly slick, but the mark holds. You find a position where the paddle's path seems likely to cross in the next inward push. Someone behind you extends a length of cord, unspooling it with calm hands. Another person holds a shallow basket, ready to catch and secure if the paddle reaches shore. No one speaks. No one needs to. Bodies angle and adjust. Eyes track. The plan forms without being announced. The water surges in again, and the paddle glides closer, close enough now that you can see the blade's edge catching faint light. You lean forward, but you do not step into deeper water. You extend the cord end, weighted slightly by a small knot, and toss it with a short, controlled motion so it lands across the paddle shaft. The cord falls over it, and for a breath you think it won't hold. The water tugs. The paddle rotates. The cord slips down toward the blade. But someone on shore tightens the line with a gentle pull at the right moment. Steady, not jerking. Turning the cord into a loop that catches against the paddle's broader end. Now the paddle is linked to land. You don't yank. You let the next small retreat of water pull the paddle outward slightly while the cord guides its angle. Then, on the following inward push, you pull just enough to draw it up the sand where friction begins to help you. Another pair of hands reaches in with the basket to block its slide back. The paddle scrapes, then rests. The storm's prize returned to the people who actually need it. Relief doesn't arrive as applause. It arrives as a small exhale, as shoulders loosening, as the line being coiled back into order. The paddle is set farther under cover, secured in a place the wind can't argue with. The beach edge is checked again for other loose items, because once the wind has stolen something successfully, it tends to come back for seconds like an opportunistic seagull. You return under shelter with rain dripping from your hair and sleeves, but your chest feels steadier. The storm still moves beyond the leaf roof. The lagoon still churns. Yet you've watched a problem appear and be handled without panic, without drama, without cracking the village's calm. You settle back into the warmth, knowing the tide will continue to misbehave for a while, and knowing, too, that steadiness has just proved itself again, right in front of you. The paddle rests safely under cover now, no longer a sleek invitation for the wind to steal. The cord is coiled with care, because even after success, this shore doesn't reward itself with mess. Outside, rain still works the lagoon into restless texture, but the shelter holds steady, and that steadiness begins to settle into you like weight sinking into a mattress. Night watch doesn't look like the movies because the movies are addicted to showing off. Here it looks like quiet continuity. People shift positions without announcing it. Someone checks the shelter edge where runoff might drip onto drying racks. Someone else leans out to watch the lagoon's line and the canoes beyond it. A hand adjusts a stone at the fire bed so embers remain contained. Another hand nudges a pot away from the outer draft so cooling stays gradual. The work is small and constant, and it keeps everything from tipping into chaos. You notice the communication first, not with words, but with micro-movements. A finger points low, toward a puddle forming near a post. A palm turns downward to signal calm. No rush, no flare. A slight tilt of the head directs attention toward the beach line, where foam is creeping a little farther up sand than before. Eyes meet briefly, then separate, each person carrying their part of the awareness. It feels like a net woven across the night. Light, flexible, strong enough to catch problems before they fall too far. Even the fire participates. It is not allowed to roar. It is not fed in big, dramatic bursts. A few pieces of fuel are added as needed, angled so they catch slowly. Heat stays present for warmth and drying, but not so aggressive it invites sparks or smoke storms inside the shelter. The embers glow like a controlled heartbeat. Outside, wind keeps pushing the lagoon inward in long, heavy breaths. The reef line remains a whispering barrier, but you can tell the sea has grown impatient. Waves slap at the openings in the reef and send surges through, turning the lagoon into a Messier version of itself. The surface is no longer glass. It's rough silk, pulled and wrinkled. Every so often, a stronger gust presses rain sideways and makes the leaf roof tremble. Water trickles down lashings and drops onto sand with soft plinks. The smell is wet fiber, damp wood, and smoke pressed low by moisture. It should be unsettling. Instead, it's oddly comforting because you're watching a system absorb pressure without breaking. Then you see it. A faint orange glow beyond the shelter, closer to the beach edge than your own embers should reach. At first, your mind tries to explain it away. Reflection, lightning, some trick of rain. But the glow persists, steady, low, and too warm to be imagination. It's a small signal fire, an ember light, sheltered and controlled, positioned where it can be seen from the lagoon line without being drowned by wind. The village isn't just waiting out the storm, it's staying legible to itself. The signal fire's purpose becomes clear through behavior. A person stands where they can see both the lagoon and the glow, using it as a reference point. Another person checks the canoe's silhouettes against it. If a canoe shifts, the contrast changes. If a lashing loosens, the hull's angle changes. The signal light is a ruler drawn in flame, measuring drift in the dark. You join the watch in a quiet way, positioning yourself where you can observe without becoming an obstacle. Your eyes adjust to rain and darkness. You begin to see what they see. The waterline creeping and retreating, the way foam gathers in certain spots, the way wind gusts arrive in patterns rather than randomness. Storms have rhythms too. They just aren't written down for your convenience. A small puddle forming near the pottery racks becomes a potential problem. Water is a patient enemy. It doesn't need to rush. Someone moves a slab, tilting it so runoff diverts away from the rack's legs. Another person presses sand into a slight ridge, guiding water along a channel like a miniature shoreline. Your own hands find work. You scoop damp sand and shape it into a barrier, feeling the grains pack under your palms. The simple labor, almost childlike, but effective. The puddle drains away, and the rack stays dry. A gust shifts direction briefly, aiming smoke into the shelter and irritating eyes. Again, the response is quiet. A piece of fuel is rotated. A leafy screen is adjusted. The smoke lifts and resumes its polite path. Nothing is allowed to become a bigger problem than it needs to be. The night watch continues like this, steady, understated, almost soothing. And then you notice how your own body has changed. Your shoulders aren't raised anymore. Your breathing is slower, deeper. Your thoughts aren't sprinting ahead to tomorrow's anxieties. They're anchored in immediate, solvable things. Keep pottery dry. Keep embers contained. Keep canoes secure. Keep the village connected through light and awareness. The signal fire glows on, small and stubborn against rain. It doesn't fight the storm. It simply insists on being seen. In that, it feels like a lesson you can carry home. You don't have to overpower your worries. You just have to stay steady enough to notice them and redirect them before they flood your floor. As the storm begins, almost imperceptibly, to soften. Rain thinning from sheets to a calmer fall. You stay with the watch a little longer, letting the night's quiet coordination lull you. You feel yourself becoming part of the net. One more set of eyes, one more pair of hands, helping the village remain intact until the sea decides it's done showing off. The storm loosens its grip gradually, like a fist remembering it has fingers. Rain thins from hard sheets to steady drizzle. Wind still arrives in gusts, but they carry less aggression now, more leftover momentum than fresh threat. The lagoon's surface remains wrinkled, yet the sharpest chop begins to smooth into longer, slower swells. Under shelter, the night watch transitions without announcement into the next phase. Assessment. People move through the space as if reading a familiar text, checking each line for damage, each margin for smudges. You follow because now that you've helped hold the night together, your body feels oddly responsible for what morning finds. The first discovery is small, but it matters. A few storage parcels have taken on dampness at the edges. Leaves that were meant to shield have shifted slightly under wind pressure. A corner of a mat is wetter than it should be. Nothing is ruined yet, but damp is a quiet saboteur. It doesn't crash in, creeps. The second discovery is more immediate. A cracked vessel. It sits near the edge of the pottery area, Not shattered, not collapsed. Just split along a thin line from rim toward shoulder. The crack is clean, almost elegant in its cruelty. A piece that survived fire and careful cooling has still been caught by the storm's temperature swings, or by a draft that found one weak point in the clay. You feel a small pinch in your chest. Not because it is your pot, but because you now understand the labor inside it. You saw the stamping, the drying, the careful fueling, the slow rise of heat, the protective cooling. A crack is not only damage, it is time lost. No one performs grief. Hands simply lift the vessel and inspect it under the remaining emberlight. Fingertips run along the line to feel how deep it goes. The pot is rotated, checked for branching fractures. Then it is set aside, still useful perhaps, but not trusted for liquids. The village doesn't waste a cracked pot on principle. It repurposes. It adapts. It moves on. Nearby, more subtle issues appear. A few drying pieces feel too cool and damp, having absorbed moisture from the storm air. Some stamped surfaces have softened slightly at the outer edges, not enough to erase the pattern, but enough to blur the crispness that makes the design sing. Smoke, pressed down by humidity, has left soot marks where it shouldn't. And in the storage area, one basket has toppled, spilling a portion of dried goods onto damp sand. This is the moment when a less practiced community might finally panic, when the adrenaline comes late after the danger and gets spent on regret. But here, the response is the same measured intelligence you've watched all night. First, triage. What must be saved immediately is handled immediately. Damp parcels are opened and checked. Anything still safe is shifted to warmth. Leaf wraps are replaced. The smoldering fire is strengthened just enough to create drying heat without inviting sparks. Food at risk becomes breakfast soon rather than waste later. Second, drying. Mats are lifted and hung where the breeze can reach them. Baskets are shaken, wiped, and set near warmth. Any spilled dried goods are inspected piece by piece. Some salvaged, some discarded without drama. Better to lose a little now than to poison the whole store later. This shore is practical with loss. It does not romanticize it. Third, repair. You watch a pot-mending process that feels both humble and ingenious. For a cracked vessel, the goal is not to pretend the crack never happened. The goal is to stabilize it for a different job. The edges are cleaned. Resin-like material, sticky sap warmed slightly, is prepared to seal and reinforce. Fiber cord is readied, thin but strong, like the same lashings that hold outrigger beams in place. Small holes are worked into the clay near the crack line. Carefully, precisely, because adding damage to fix damage is a delicate art. Then fiber is threaded through, laced across the crack like stitches. The sap is applied to seal, and the lacing holds tension, keeping the crack from widening. The result is not invisible. It is honest. The vessel now wears its repair like a scar, proof it survived pressure and is still useful. For blurred, stamped edges on unfired pieces, the solution is gentler. Those pieces are brought into controlled warmth and allowed to dry again, slowly, so the surface settles without further distortion. If a pattern has softened too much, the piece may be reworked, pressed again with the stamp while the clay is still willing, or smoothed and re-stamped in a fresh band. You see how the stamp becomes both signature and corrective tool. Repeat the rhythm, restore the border. You are given simple work that supports the repairs. You help hold a pot steady while fiber is threaded. You pass tools, shell shard, cord, warmed sap without interrupting the flow. You carry mats to the breeze, careful not to drag wet edges through sand. You learn, in your hands, the difference between rushing and moving efficiently. As dawn approaches, the sky lightens to a pale gray. Rain reduces to scattered drops. The lagoon begins to regain its calmer face, though it still holds the memory of last night's agitation in slow undulations. The reef continues its steady whisper, as if it's been awake the whole time, unimpressed by the storm's little performance. The village looks different now, not damaged, but reshuffled. Items have shifted places. Repairs are in progress. Some food has been redirected into immediate use. A cracked pot rests aside, stitched and sealed, no longer perfect but still valuable. The sight is oddly comforting, because it is the real version of resilience. Not the slogan kind, but the quiet kind that simply keeps going. You sit for a moment, watching a repaired pot's lacing dry and tighten. It holds. The crack remains, but it is contained. You realize this is what the village has been teaching you all along. Cracks happen, storms happen, small losses happen. The difference is what you do next, how calmly you assess, how steadily you mend, how wisely you store what remains. And as the first thin light touches the stamped bands on a newly dried vessel, making the dents cast tiny shadows again, you feel something in you settle into the same pattern. Not untouched perfection, but repaired usefulness, held together by patience and practical care. Morning arrives without fanfare, as if it respects how tired the world feels after weather. The sky turns from gray to pale gold. The lagoon smooths itself into longer breaths, still carrying a faint leftover swell, like someone waking up after a restless night and stretching slowly into calm. The village's work doesn't rush to get back to normal. It simply continues, repair blending into routine, routine blending into rebuilding. You follow that flow toward the pottery area again, because the storm's small damages have pointed everyone back to the craft that anchors so much of this shore's order. The kiln space, its shallow pit and stone lining, has been disturbed slightly. Wind and rain have pushed ash into odd corners. A few stones have shifted. Fuel stacks have taken on dampness at the outer layer. Nothing catastrophic, just the kind of mess that makes future firing unreliable if left uncorrected. So rebuilding begins, not as an emergency, but as maintenance, the calm art of preventing tomorrow's failure. Ash is cleared first, scooped and brushed away, saved where it can be used as barrier or insect discouragement later. Wet fuel is separated from dry fuel and spread out to air, because damp would make smoke and frustration rather than heat. Stones are reset, pressed back into stable positions, their blackened faces turned where they need to reflect heat inward. The pit's shape is restored, shallow enough for control, wide enough for several pots, lined so embers won't wander. You help with what you can, lifting stones, shaking damp leaves, carrying smaller pieces to a drying place. The work is grounding. It reminds your body that problems are often solvable with hands and time, not with spiraling thought. Nearby, clay is being prepared again, because craft does not wait for perfect conditions. The storm took crispness from a few stamped edges, and that means the stamping rhythm must return to restore it. Clay is kneaded, rolled, and smoothed. Water is added in tiny amounts, then withheld, the mixture tuned until it holds shape without cracking. It's like watching someone adjust a calm mood, not by forcing happiness, but by balancing conditions until steadiness becomes possible. When stamping begins again, the soundless precision feels almost like a lullaby. A dentate stamp presses its tiny teeth into the clay's shoulder. A triangular tool repeats its mark, creating nested peaks that look like waves frozen mid-motion. Borders are rebuilt cleanly, a new band laid where the old softened. The makers don't mourn the blur. They overwrite it with fresh clarity. They don't complain about the storm. They incorporate it, letting it become a reason for stronger technique. You notice that the repaired pot from last night sits nearby, its lacing dried and tightened. It looks different in daylight, less like damage, more like design. The fiber stitches cross the crack with quiet confidence, and the sealant has darkened into a smooth line. It will not hold liquids like a perfect jar, perhaps, but it will hold grain, dried roots, salt, beads, useful things that don't demand watertight perfection. The vessel has been reassigned rather than discarded. The village has once again refused waste. A new firing is planned, but carefully. Dampness from the storm still lingers in the air, and firing damp clay is an invitation to heartbreak. So the day becomes a dance between drying and waiting. Pots are set in a warm zone near the sun and the shelter's edge, where airflow can do its work without direct heat shocking the surface. They are turned gently so one side doesn't dry faster than the other. Fingers check rims and bellies for cool dampness. The makers are listening with touch. As the sun climbs higher, the lagoon brightens. Its surface turns a muted blue-green, and you can see down into shallower areas where sand ripples lie like frozen waves. In the distance, the reef breaks small swells into white lace. Canoes are checked again, not because danger is immediate now, but because yesterday's storm earns today's extra attention. Lashings are tightened. Hulls are dried and inspected. The village doesn't move on by forgetting. It moves on by double-checking. By late morning, the air feels drier. Fuel stacks have aired out enough for controlled burn. The firing space is clean and ready. Pots chosen for firing are the ones that have dried evenly, that feel less cool to the touch, that ring slightly firmer when tapped. Pieces still holding moisture are left to wait, because impatience is the one storm you can always avoid. The fire is built again, small, disciplined, coaxed. Dry kindling catches and becomes steady embers. Pots are arranged carefully in the pit with space between them. A layer of fuel is added around them, not on top of them, letting heat rise and wrap rather than smother and scorch. The fire grows slowly, breathing in controlled increments. You watch the transformation with a quieter heart than the night before. Smoke rises cleaner now, not pushed down by rain. Embers glow more openly. The pots begin to change color subtly. Darker where soot kisses, lighter where heat burns clean. Their stamped dents turning into tiny shadow catches. The patterns look sharper, somehow, as if the storm's attempt to blur them has been answered with extra clarity. The makers adjust fuel placement with calm hands, shifting pieces, adding small amounts, waiting between changes to let heat distribute. The kiln becomes a lesson in controlled response. Heat applied steadily, not dumped in panic. It's the same lesson you've watched all along, repeating in different materials: clay, food, community, emotion. When the fire reaches its peak, it is not loud. It is contained intensity, the kind that doesn't need to prove itself. Then it is allowed to recede into embers again, and the pots are left to cool gradually, protected from sudden drafts. The day's warmth helps. The air is kinder now. As you sit near the firing area, eyes half-lidded from smoke and sun and the sheer comfort of repetition, you realize something. Rebuilding isn't a separate phase from living here. It's part of living. The shore never pretends it can control tides or storms. Controls what it can: attention, patience, technique, care. And when you look at the stamped pottery, new bands clean and crisp, repaired vessels honest and useful, you feel the same truth settling into your chest. You don't need a perfect, unbroken life to be steady. You need the willingness to rest amp blurred edges, to reset shifted stones, to rebuild the kiln, to continue. The kiln's warmth lingers in the air even after the fire has stepped back into embers, and you sit close enough to feel that gentle heat on your shins, like the last comfort of a blanket before you have to get up. The stamped bands on the cooling pots catch morning light in tiny shadows, proof that patience can survive wind, rain, and the occasional crack that tries to pretend it's the end of the world. By the time the sun climbs and the lagoon brightens into its blue-green clarity again, the village begins to lean toward the water with a different kind of readiness. This isn't reef foraging or storm watch. This is travel preparation, the kind that looks casual only because every rope, every paddle, every decision has been made so many times it lives in the hands. Canoes are pulled down toward the firmer sand, and you feel a small private gratitude toward the paddle that tried to escape last night and failed. It rests where it should now, secured like the idea of control itself. Lashings are checked again, because sea wind has no respect for your confidence. Outrigger beams are pressed, tightened, and retied, the cords crossing in patterns that echo the pottery stamps. Repetition is security, rhythm is strength. Trade winds arrive as a steady presence rather than a sudden event. You feel them on your cheeks first, then see them in the lagoon's surface. Long streaks of texture that run in a consistent direction. The reef still breaks larger waves, but beyond it the ocean moves with more open muscle. The day is brighter than the storm night, yet not gentler in every way. Sun and wind can exhaust you just as effectively as rain, only with better lighting. You step into the canoe with practiced care now, placing weight low, moving as if you've learned that wobbling is not charming. The canoe accepts you and settles, and you push away from shore with a glide that feels like leaving a room where you were safe. Not because you're forced out, but because the world beyond has something to show you. The lagoon carries you toward the reef openings where water funnels out. You watch the color change, pale sand to deeper green to a darker, richer blue. The reef line, seen from this angle, looks like a low, pale seam of white where waves break and flatten. The canoe rides the gentle lift and drop of swells slipping through, and you feel the old instinct to grip too tightly, hands clenching, shoulders tensing, as if tension can control physics. You let it go. You let the outrigger do its job. You let the canoe be what it was built to be. Once beyond the reef's shelter, the world opens. The ocean stretches wider, its surface patterned by wind. Swells roll in long, slow lines, not chaotic, just persistent. The canoe's movement becomes a steady rhythm. Rise, settle, rise. The paddle's entry and exit is clean and consistent, slicing the water with a quiet confidence that makes your modern sense of hurry feel a little embarrassed. Navigation happens the way it did in the lagoon, only now the scale is bigger and the stakes are less forgiving. The shoreline behind you shrinks into a low strip of green. Ahead, distant land is barely more than a darker smudge against bright sky. Your eyes learn to read what seems like nothing. A subtle cloud thickening that suggests land below. The way the swell direction shifts slightly around unseen obstacles. The way birds travel with purpose toward places your eyes can't yet confirm. Trade winds help and challenge at the same time. They lend speed, but they also demand alignment. If you fight them, you waste effort and invite drift. If you work with them, they become a moving road across water. The canoe adjusts course through small corrections, paddle angles, weight shifts, tiny changes made early. It feels exactly like stamping a border. The difference between a clean band and a messy one is not one big heroic correction. It's 100 small ones done on time. You travel for hours in a calm that is not sleepy, but steady. Sun warms your forearms. Wind cools the salt on your skin. Your mind quiets into simple observations. The glitter of light on wave faces, the darker troughs, the occasional flying fish skimming the surface like a quick thought that doesn't want to be caught. You drink when offered, because the sea will happily dehydrate you while looking beautiful. In the canoe, goods are packed low and protected. Bundles wrapped in leaves and fiber, baskets secured against shifting, a few finished pots cushioned carefully so their stamped sides won't scrape. Some vessels are utilitarian, strong-bodied jars meant for storage and transport. Others are smaller, more delicate, their patterns sharper, the kind of pieces that carry meaning as much as function. You understand the point without anyone needing to say it. These pots are not only for the home shore. They are meant to travel. Eventually, the distant smudge becomes definite. A low island rises from the horizon. Green at the center, pale sand at the edges, reef-white froth hugging its perimeter. As you approach, the water lightens again, revealing sandbars and coral heads beneath. The canoe threads into a calm pocket behind the reef, and your shoulders drop in relief you didn't realize you were holding. The landing is smooth, controlled. The canoe noses onto sand. Hands step out, steady it, lift it higher to keep it safe from the tide's fickle reach. The air smells different here, still salt, still green, but with a slightly different mix of plants, a different dampness in the wind. The shoreline feels familiar and new at once, like meeting a cousin who looks enough like you to be unsettling. People appear from the shade and the tree line, drawn by the canoe's arrival. The reception is practical, like at your first shore. Space is made, items are guided where to rest, movements are careful around the pots. You sense kinship in the ease of it, not in exaggerated celebration. The bodies move with the same logic, the same confidence around woven mats, baskets, and clay. Exchange unfolds without the theatrical vibe of a marketplace. It's more like a shared inventory of relationships. Bundles are set out. Pots are lifted and turned so the stamped bands can be seen. Hands trace dents lightly, checking crispness, admiring continuity. In return, other goods appear, shell ornaments with different hues, stone pieces shaped for cutting or scraping, fibers and dried foods from this island's particular harvest. Nothing feels like a conquest. It feels like balance. One shore offering what it is good at, another shore answering in kind. You watch the pottery do its quiet work. A stamp jar isn't just a container. It's evidence. Evidence of skill, of clay knowledge, of firing mastery, of a community stable enough to produce more than the immediate emergency requires. The patterns serve as recognition, this style, these borders, this particular rhythm of dentate marks. Its identity pressed into clay, traveling farther than a person can swim. You also notice how the storm becomes part of the story without being spoken. A repaired pot, stitched and sealed, sits among the goods. It is not hidden. It is honest proof that weather happens and people respond. The repair lacing looks almost decorative in the daylight, and you feel a quiet satisfaction that resilience can be carried, displayed, and still respected. As the day stretches on, you move through shade and sun, observing the shared practices that make distant kin feel close. Similar racks for drying, similar smoke use, similar careful storage. The differences are in details, different plant fibers, different shell colors, slightly different motifs, but the foundation is the same. A network exists across water, held together by canoes, trade winds, and the dependable language of repeated craft. When the time comes to return, the canoe is repacked with new bundles secured low. The pots that arrived have been placed into new hands. Goods from this island settle into your canoe like another set of patterns joining the band. You step back into the hull, and the ocean opens again, wide and bright, ready to carry you home. As the trade winds push your canoe forward, you let your eyes soften. You think of stamped borders wrapping clay, of lashings wrapping beams, of relationships wrapping islands into a quiet chain across the sea. And you realize the Lapita Shore is not a single place you visit. It is a moving world, patterned, navigated, exchanged, held together by steady hands that keep pressing, tying, paddling, and mending, no matter what the weather decides to try next. The canoe glides back into the home lagoon with the softened certainty of return. The reef line whispers behind you, and the water changes color from ocean blue to lagoon green to pale sandlit shallows. By the time the hull noses onto familiar beach, the day's sun has begun to slope, turning everything warmer, less sharp, as if the world is already preparing itself for rest. Goods are carried up the sand and set under shelter. Bundles from the other island, shell ornaments, stone tools, fibers, are placed with the same orderly care you saw in the storage shelters. Lifted off damp ground, hung where air can move, kept where insects won't get ideas. The trade has been integrated into the village's system, not stacked as trophies. And now, subtly, the village's attention turns toward you. Not in a spotlight way, not in a celebrity guest way. In the quiet, practical way of hosts who have been letting you watch their lives and are now offering you a small chance to participate more fully. You feel the moment before it happens, the slight widening of space, the positioning of tools, the way a mat is cleared near the stamping area. Your body leans forward without needing permission. Clay is prepared again, kneaded until it becomes smooth and responsive. A small portion is separated and rolled into a thick disc, then pressed into a shallow shape that could become a small bowl or a simple lid. It is intentionally modest, sized for learning rather than for proving anything. The piece sits on a flat slab so it won't deform, and you are guided closer with a palm-down gesture that says, "Calm, steady, here." The stamping tools are arranged near your reach. A shell-toothed comb stamp, a triangular notch tool, a smaller point for dots. They look deceptively simple, like something a bored person might carve while waiting for the tide. But you know better now. Tools like these are concentrated knowledge, geometry that fits in the hand. A stamp is lifted and shown to you, angled so you can see the teeth. You inhale not because you need air, but because your body is gathering itself. Then you take the stamp carefully. It feels cool and smooth against your fingers, its edge slightly sharp where it needs to bite into clay. You hover it above the clay disc, and you feel the familiar urge to overthink. Where should I start? What if I ruin it? What if my pattern looks like a confused caterpillar? Your anxious brain loves creativity because it provides endless new opportunities to judge yourself. Very efficient, very rude. But the village's calm interrupts that habit. The piece is rotated slightly, giving you a clear section to begin. The stamp is positioned at the rim where a border makes sense, because borders are forgiving teachers. The clay waits, soft and willing. You press. The stamp meets clay with a gentle resistance. You feel the teeth sink in just enough. You lift, and there it is. A clean row of tiny dents, crisp and satisfying, like a footprint line in wet sand that won't immediately wash away. You press again, aligning the teeth with the last mark so the border continues without gaps. Your hands tremble slightly at first, then steady as your confidence catches up with the simplicity of the motion. Press, lift, slide, press. The rhythm starts to settle into you. You realize the border is not about perfection. It's about consistency. If one mark is slightly deeper, it becomes character rather than failure, as long as the overall line remains true. Your breathing slows as the pattern grows. Around you, people continue their work, sorting trade goods, checking racks, tending a small fire. Yet their movements are arranged so you have space, so you are not rushed. You complete the first band. It wraps almost fully around the rim, and the final press meets the first with only a tiny mismatch, barely visible and honestly kind of charming. You resist the impulse to apologize to the clay. The clay does not care. It has already accepted your dents as part of its surface. You are offered a different tool, triangular notch, and you add a second band beneath the first. This time you press triangles in a repeating pattern. Peak, gap, peak, gap. The shapes echo the waves you saw beyond the reef, the mountain-like motifs you saw on other vessels. Your hands learn the pressure, not too hard to tear, not too soft to blur. When you slip slightly and a triangle lands at a slight angle, You correct the next one early, and the band regains its rhythm. The lesson is immediate. Don't fix everything with one big correction. Fix it with small ones on time. Dots come last, placed in clusters between borders. You use the pointed tool to press tiny circles into the clay, making a simple motif that feels like starlight reflected in a tide pool. The design is modest compared to the masterworks you've seen, but it carries the same logic. A pattern is a promise. Repeat something with care, and it becomes meaning. When you're done, the piece is lifted carefully and set onto a drying rack in a protected corner. You feel an unexpected tenderness in your chest, because you've left a mark here, not by taking something, but by contributing something, even small. Your stamped disc joins the others like a quiet note slipped into a book. As the evening approaches, the village begins to shift again toward wind-down tasks. Fire is adjusted lower. Food parcels are prepared for another calm meal. Trade goods are stored. The lagoon continues its steady breathing. You look at your mud-bordered hand and notice the mark has started to fade slightly at the edges, reminding you that some things are meant to be temporary. But your clay piece, still soft, still drying, will harden, and its dents will remain. You walk past the racks and glance at your stamped border catching the last light. It looks real. It looks honest. It looks like proof that you learned something here beyond facts. Something about steadiness, about repetition, about letting your hands work while your mind rests. And as the first stars return to the sky, you carry that feeling with you. That you can make something simple and lasting when you stop trying to impress the world and start following the tide's calmer rhythm instead. The day eases down as if it's tired of being bright. Heat softens into warmth, and the lagoon returns to that glassy calm that makes you suspect it was never angry at all, just briefly expressive. Your stamped clay piece sits on the rack in a protected corner, edges firming, surface dulling. The tiny mismatch where your border meets itself now feeling less like a mistake and more like a signature. You drift toward the shoreline, drawn by the tide's steady schedule. The village moves with you in its own way, some carrying baskets, some checking lashings, some simply walking because the sea is part of the evening, like a familiar song that plays whether you notice it or not. The air smells clean. Salt, leaf, and a trace of smoke that no longer has to fight rain. Over the reef, the ocean breathes with lazy confidence, and the sky thins into dusk. Low tide approaches, and the beach broadens, revealing more sand, more shells, more dark seagrass ribbons waving in the shallows. Shallow pools hold the sky in fragments. You remember the night when the storm tried to steal a paddle and your nervous system tried to steal the whole plot. Neither one won. You remember the signal fire's stubborn glow and how it kept the village readable to itself. You remember the cracked pot stitched back into usefulness, because this shore does not worship perfection. It worships usefulness, continuity, and calm repair. A gesture draws you back toward the racks. Your piece has dried enough to be handled, still fragile, but no longer glossy with moisture. It is lifted with care and placed into your palm as if it weighs more than it does. The clay is cool now, and you feel the texture under your fingertips. Dentate marks at the rim, triangular peaks beneath, a few star-like dots scattered between. You turn it slowly, watching the evening light catch the dents and cast tiny shadows. Simple, yes, but true. You carry it down toward the waterline because your body wants to compare the stamped pattern to the living pattern of the sea. The lagoon meets you halfway, a thin sheet of water sliding up the sand, then withdrawing again, leaving the beach polished and dark. The tide does not hurry. It arrives, recedes, returns, like breathing in a sleeping room. You let the water reach your toes. Cool, steady, indifferent to your timeline, which is exactly what makes it comforting. Behind you, the village settles into a quieter kind of togetherness. Fires are reduced to embers. Baskets are rehung higher, jar lids reweighted, because the sea may be calm now, but it likes to change its mind when you least feel like dealing with it. These final checks happen without fanfare, and your mind starts to copy the pattern. Check what matters, secure what you can, let the rest go. You take one last slow walk along the reef edge, careful with your steps, respectful of coral's sharp honesty. Pools hold tiny creatures that cling and wait for water to return. A small fish flickers through a deeper channel, then disappears into shadow. The world out here is quiet but busy, and it makes you privately amused at how you once believed quiet meant nothing. Quiet is simply life not performing. As dusk thickens, you glance at your hand and notice the mud border is nearly gone. Edges softened, the mark flaking away with salt and movement, as temporary as a footprint. You look down at the clay keepsake resting in your palm and feel the gentle contrast. One mark meant to disappear, one mark meant to stay. You did not come here to become someone else. You came here to rest inside a different rhythm long enough to remember yourself. The farewell does not arrive with grand gestures. It arrives as space made for you at the edge of the village, where you can take the scene in: low roofs, drying racks, pottery with stamped bands, canoes resting above the tide line, the lagoon smoothing itself into night. A final glance passes between faces and yours, steady, warm, uncomplicated. The kind of goodbye that trusts you to carry what you need without demanding you prove you deserved it. You step to the beach and let the lagoon's sound fill your ears. The reef whispers. Stars appear one by one until the sky becomes a broad, dark roof again. Roomy enough to hold every worry you brought here and still have space left over. You close your fingers around the clay piece, feeling its cool firmness, and you imagine it surviving travel. Wrapped in leaves, cushioned in fiber, protected the way this village protects everything valuable, through careful placement and calm attention. Then you begin to walk, not away from the shore as a rejection, but away as a continuation. Each step feels lighter, as if the sand is letting you go without resentment. Behind you, the Lapita Shore keeps doing what it has always done, stamping meaning into clay, turning tides into schedules, turning storms into repairs, turning quiet work into a life sturdy enough to feed a community and welcome a tired visitor who thought rest was something you had to earn. The lagoon recedes into darkness and then into dreamlike softness, its surface catching the last fragments of starlight like scattered beads. You hold your stamped keepsake in your palm and let its cool weight remind you that steadiness can be made. Pressed in, fired true, and carried gently, no matter where you wake up tomorrow. You let the shoreline blur the way thoughts blur when they stop being useful. The sand cools under your feet, and the lagoon keeps smoothing itself, polishing every ripple into a quieter shape. Somewhere behind you, a last ember settles, and the faint smoke you can still smell feels less like fire and more like comfort, like warmth remembered. You hold the little stamped clay piece against your palm, and you notice how your grip relaxes around it without dropping it. That is the kind of holding you've been practicing here. Firm enough to keep what matters, gentle enough not to crush it. Your breathing slows until it matches the tide's patient rhythm. In, out, in, out. Nothing you need to solve tonight. The reef continues its soft whispering, breaking the ocean's moods into manageable sound. The stars keep arriving, one at a time, until the sky becomes a calm ceiling over everything. The village roofs, the drying racks, the canoes resting safely above the waterline, and you, intact after a day that asked you to be present instead of perfect. If your mind tries to drag you back to tomorrow, you let it. You don't wrestle it. You simply return your attention to the cool clay, to the salt air, to the gentle hush of water sliding up the shore and slipping away again. The same motion, repeated until it becomes soothing. Your eyelids grow heavier, and the scene grows softer around the edges. The stamped dents on your keepsake fade into texture, then into a feeling. The lagoon becomes a dark mirror, then a dream surface, then only a sense of space. You are safe. You are allowed to rest. You have done enough. And now, quietly, you let the night carry you the rest of the way. End of story. Sweet dreams.